The bullet that killed Henry Sawyer hadn't been meant for him, but it found his heart all the same on a dusty Tuesday in April of 1883. And with it went every dream Helena Sawyer had ever dared to hold. She was 24 years old, standing in the general store in Goldfield, Nevada, when the stray shot from a drunken brawl outside shattered the window and her entire world in the span of a single breath. The glass fell like rain, and Henry crumpled beside the flour barrels, his brown eyes finding hers one last time before the light left them completely. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The sound trapped itself somewhere between her lungs and throat, hardening into something cold and permanent that would live inside her chest for months to come. The funeral was attended by half the town, though Helena remembered none of their faces. She stood in her black dress, one she'd had to borrow from Martha Connolly because she'd never owned mourning clothes, never imagined she'd need them so soon. They'd only been married 2 years. 2 years of laughter and plans and the small house Henry had built with his own hands on the edge of town. 2 years wasn't enough. A lifetime wouldn't have been enough. The whispers started within a week. Goldfield was a small town, born from the recent silver strikes that drew desperate men and determined families to the harsh Nevada desert. Everyone knew everyone's business, and Helena's business became the favorite topic over coffee and cards. She was too young to be a widow, too pretty to stay alone for long, too fragile, some said, watching the way she moved through her days like a ghost haunting her own life. Margaret Foster, the banker's wife, was the first to say it loud enough for Helena to hear. "Poor thing is too broken to ever love again." A woman doesn't recover from something like that. Best she can hope for is someone charitable enough to marry her out of pity. Helena had been standing just outside the church, arriving late to Sunday service. The words hit her like a physical blow, but she lifted her chin, smoothed her skirt, and walked inside. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She'd done enough crumbling in private, thank you very much. The months crawled by. Summer turned the desert into an oven, and Helena learned to move through her days with mechanical precision. She took in sewing and mending to make ends meet. The small savings Henry had left wouldn't last forever, and the house, though paid for, still needed upkeep. Her hands stayed busy, but her heart remained locked away, buried somewhere deep where no one could touch it again. It was September when Ashton O'Reilly rode into Goldfield. Helena first saw him from her window, a tall figure on a dusty gray horse, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. He dismounted outside the Silver Dollar Saloon with the easy grace of a man who'd spent more time in a saddle than in chairs, his movements economical and sure. She thought nothing of it. Cowboys passed through Goldfield regularly, drawn by work at the nearby ranches or the promise of silver in the surrounding hills. But Ashton O'Reilly didn't pass through. He stayed. By the end of his first week, Helena learned what everyone else in town had already discovered through the relentless gossip mill. He was 27 years old, originally from Montana, and he'd taken a job as foreman at the Double R Ranch 15 miles outside of town. He was quiet, competent, and apparently had a way with horses that bordered on magical. He also had no interest in the saloon girls who batted their eyes at him, or the available young ladies whose mothers pushed them forward at every opportunity. Helena encountered him properly for the first time in early October at the Mercantile. She was examining a bolt of blue cotton, calculating whether she could afford enough for a new work dress, when someone spoke beside her. "Excuse me, madam. Could you tell me where they keep the lamp oil?" His voice was deep and soft, with a slight drawl that spoke of long years in the saddle and open spaces. Helena looked up into a face that was handsome in a weathered, honest way. He had dark blonde hair that needed cutting, green eyes that seemed to notice everything, and a scar along his jawline that suggested a past more interesting than most. "Back corner, left side of the counter," she said, her voice coming out steadier than she expected. "Much obliged." He touched the brim of his hat and started to turn away, then paused. "You're Mrs. Sawyer, aren't you?" She stiffened slightly. "I am." "I'm sorry for your loss. I heard what happened. That was a terrible thing." There was no pity in his voice, no judgment, just simple, honest sympathy. It caught her off guard. Most people either gushed with excessive emotion or avoided mentioning Henry altogether, as if speaking his name might shatter her completely. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded once and walked away to find his lamp oil. Helena watched him go, something unfamiliar stirring in her chest before she ruthlessly pushed it down. She wasn't interested. She would never be interested again. But Goldfield was a small town, and their paths crossed again and again. She saw him at the church social, standing awkwardly on the periphery while the other young people danced. She passed him on the street as she carried her basket to and from the mercantile. He always nodded respectfully, never presuming conversation, never pushing. It was late October when everything changed. Helena had taken on a particularly difficult mending job, a torn saddle blanket for one of the local ranchers, and she needed to deliver it before sundown. The ranch was only 3 miles out of town, an easy walk in decent weather. But the desert had other plans. A sudden dust storm rolled in from the west, turning the sky brown and the air thick enough to choke on. Helena wrapped her shawl around her face and pushed forward, desperate to make the delivery and collect the payment she desperately needed. The wind howled, tearing at her clothes and hair. Sand stung her exposed skin. She could barely see 3 feet ahead, and when she stumbled over a rock hidden in the swirling dust, she went down hard, her ankle twisting beneath her. Pain shot up her leg, sharp and immediate. She tried to stand and couldn't. The basket with the mended blanket tumbled away, disappearing into the brown chaos. Panic clawed at her throat. She was alone, injured, and no one knew where she was. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and night would fall soon. That was when she heard the horse. The sound of hooves came from her left, steady and sure despite the storm. A shape materialized through the dust, and then Ashton O'Reilly was dismounting beside her, his bandana pulled up over his nose and mouth. "Mrs. Sawyer." His voice barely carried over the wind. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle," she called back. "I cannot stand." He didn't hesitate. In one smooth motion, he bent and lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. The strength in him was startling, but more startling was the gentleness with which he held her. He carried her to his horse, a sturdy gray gelding that stood patient despite the storm, and somehow managed to mount while holding her, settling her across his lap. "Hold on to me," he said against her ear, and Helena had no choice but to wrap her arms around his neck and press close to his chest. They rode through the storm, and Helena felt his heart beating steady and strong beneath her cheek. He smelled of leather and soap, and something indefinably masculine that she'd forgotten existed. His arms around her felt safe, solid, real. She told herself she was simply grateful for rescue, nothing more. He took her to the ranch house at the Double R rather than trying to make it back to town. The journey took almost an hour in the blinding storm, but he never wavered, never complained. When they finally reached shelter, he carried her inside to the ranch's small infirmary where the ranch owner's wife, a capable woman named Ruth, examined her ankle. "Sprained, not broken," Ruth declared after a thorough inspection. "You'll need to stay off it for a few days. The storm is getting worse. You'll have to stay here tonight." Helena wanted to protest, worried about propriety and what people would say, but another howl of wind against the windows made the argument pointless. She had no choice. Ruth settled her in a small guest room with clean sheets and a warm quilt. Ashton appeared in the doorway an hour later, cleaned up and holding a tray with soup and bread. "Ruth said you should eat," he said, hovering uncertainly at the threshold. "You can come in," Helena said, pulling herself to a sitting position against the headboard. "I believe you've earned the right after saving my life." A small smile touched his lips, transforming his serious face. "I don't know about saving your life, but I'm glad I came along when I did." He set the tray across her lap, and she noticed his hands, broad and calloused but careful. Working hands. Henry had had hands like that. "What were you doing out there?" she asked, picking up the spoon. "Checking the fence lines before the storm hit. Spotted you heading out and figured I'd better keep an eye on things. Desert storms can be deadly." He pulled up a chair and sat, keeping a respectful distance. "What were you doing out there?" "Delivering a mending job. I needed the payment." She said it simply, without shame. Everyone in Goldfield knew she had to work to survive. Something flashed in his eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite name. "In weather like that? I didn't expect the storm, and I need the money." She met his gaze directly. "I have to take care of myself now. No one else is going to do it." "That's true," he said quietly. "But there's no shame in accepting help when you need it either. I've had enough pity to last a lifetime, Mr. O'Reilly." "I wasn't offering pity, Mrs. Sawyer, just common sense." He stood, moved to the door. "Get some rest. I'll check on you in the morning." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her with her soup and a strange warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the food. The storm raged all night. Helena lay awake listening to the wind howl and the sand pepper against the window. Her ankle throbbed, but that wasn't what kept her awake. She kept thinking about strong arms and a steady heartbeat, about green eyes that looked at her without pity or judgment. About the fact that, for the first time since Henry died, she'd felt something other than numbness. It terrified her. Morning brought clear skies and a desert washed clean by wind. Ashton drove her back to town in the ranch wagon, her ankle propped on a folded blanket. They didn't speak much during the ride, but the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. When they reached her small house on the edge of town, he helped her down and walked her to the door. "Thank you," Helena said, meaning it. "I'm in your debt." "No debt," he replied. "Anyone would have done the same. But you're the one who did it." She looked up at him, really looked at him. "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because you needed help, and because I know what it's like to be alone." Before she could ask what he meant, he touched his hat brim and walked back to the wagon. She watched him drive away, something shifting inside her that she wasn't ready to name. The next week, a basket appeared on her porch. Inside was the saddle blanket she dropped in the storm, cleaned and folded, along with payment for the mending job and a note in neat, careful handwriting that said simply, "Found this and delivered it for you. Hope your ankle is healing well." There was no signature, but Helena knew who'd left it. She stood on her porch holding the basket, and for the first time in 18 months, she smiled a real smile. But Goldfield's gossips never rested. Within days, the story of Helena spending the night at the Double R Ranch had made the rounds, growing more scandalous with each retelling. Never mind that she'd been injured, that a storm had been raging, that Ruth and her husband had been present the entire time. Propriety had been breached and the widow had been alone with a man. Margaret Foster stopped Helena on the street outside the church the following Sunday. "You should be more careful about appearances, my dear. People are talking." Helena's spine straightened. "Let them talk. It's just that after what you've been through, you're so vulnerable, so broken. Men can take advantage of that sort of thing and you might not recognize it in your fragile state." Margaret's voice dripped with false concern. I'm not broken, Helena said, her voice sharp. I'm a widow. There's a difference. Of course, dear. But really, you must see that you're in no state for any kind of entanglement. Why, everyone says you'll never recover enough to love again. It would be cruel for any man to court you, knowing you cannot give your whole heart. The words hit their target, and Margaret knew it. Helena walked away without responding, but the poison had been planted. That night, alone in her house, she let herself cry for the first time in months, not because she believed Margaret Foster, but because some small, terrified part of her wondered if it might be true. November arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of winter. Helena threw herself into her work, taking on every mending and sewing job she could find. She told herself she was simply being practical, building up savings before winter made travel difficult. She didn't admit she was also trying to exhaust herself enough to stop thinking about green eyes and gentle hands. Ashton O'Reilly continued to appear in her life like clockwork. Not intrusively, never inappropriately, but there nonetheless. He fixed her fence without being asked when he noticed it sagging. He brought by a cord of firewood, claiming the ranch had extra. He helped old Mr. Peterson carry supplies into his store, and somehow Helena's order was always among them, carried in with such casual efficiency that refusing would have seemed churlish. "You need to stop," she told him one afternoon in late November when he appeared on her porch with a basket of apples from the ranch's small orchard. He looked genuinely confused. "Stop what? This, all of this?" She gestured helplessly. "The firewood, the fence, the favors." "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity." His voice was calm, patient. "It's neighborly. People are talking. People always talk. Doesn't make what they say true or important. It matters to me." Helena crossed her arms, defensive. "I've worked hard to maintain my independence and reputation. I won't have either destroyed because people think I'm too broken to know when I'm being pitied." Fire flashed in those green eyes, the first real anger she'd seen from him. "Is that what you think this is? Pity? What else would it be?" "Respect," he said quietly, the anger fading as quickly as it had come. "Admiration, even. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Mrs. Sawyer. You've taken a terrible tragedy and kept going, kept your dignity, kept your independence. That takes more courage than most people have." He set the basket of apples down on her porch rail. "But if my help is unwelcome, I'll stop. I never meant to offend you." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing on her porch with guilt settling heavy in her stomach. She'd lashed out at the one person who'd been genuinely kind to her. And for what? Because she was scared of what she might feel. At night, she lay awake staring at her ceiling, the bed that had once held two now feeling impossibly empty. Henry's face was getting harder to remember, and that terrified her. She'd loved him so completely, so fully. How could she be forgetting? What kind of person did that make her? But another face kept appearing in her mind's eye. One with a scar along the jaw and eyes that saw her, really saw her, not as a broken widow to be pitied but as a woman of strength and worth. The first snow came in early December, unusual for Goldfield but not unheard of. Helena woke to a world transformed, the desert dusted in white. It was beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. She bundled up and headed to the mercantile for supplies, knowing the snow wouldn't last, but wanting to be prepared in case another storm followed. She found Ashton at the store, buying supplies for the ranch. They hadn't spoken since their conversation on her porch 2 weeks earlier, though she'd caught him looking at her across the church during Sunday service. He nodded when he saw her, polite but distant, and something in her chest ached at the loss of his easy warmth. She was examining bolts of fabric when she heard raised voices near the front of the store. Two men, ranch hands from their clothes, were arguing over a woman. The argument escalated quickly, and suddenly one of them was reaching for his gun. "No," the store owner's voice rang out. "No guns in my store, not after what happened to Helena Sawyer." The words froze everyone in place. The two men, properly shamed, backed down and left separately. But Helena stood paralyzed, her hands gripping the fabric counter so hard her knuckles went white. The room tilted and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She was back in this same store watching Henry fall, watching the light leave his eyes, watching her entire world collapse. Strong hands gripped her arms, steadying her. Ashton's voice, low and urgent, cut through the panic. "Hey. Hey, look at me. You're all right. You're safe. Breathe with me, in and out. That's it." She focused on his face, on his voice, and slowly the world righted itself. The panic receded, leaving her shaky and embarrassed. The store had gone quiet, everyone watching. "Come on," Ashton said gently. "Let's get you home." She let him guide her outside into the cold, clean air. He walked beside her the 3 blocks to her house, his hand at her elbow, steady and sure. When they reached her door, she finally found her voice. "I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I just suddenly was back there and I couldn't breathe." "You have nothing to apologize for." He waited while she unlocked her door. "Do you have someone who can sit with you for a while?" Helena almost laughed. Who did she have? The women who called her too broken. The neighbors who whispered about her. She'd kept herself so carefully isolated, protecting herself from more pain, that she'd ended up completely alone. "No," she said simply. Ashton was quiet for a moment. Then, "Would you mind if I sat on your porch for a bit? I promise I won't intrude, but I'd feel better knowing someone was nearby, just for an hour or so." She should have said no. Should have protected her reputation and her carefully constructed walls. But she was tired, so tired of being alone, of being strong, of pretending she was fine when she wasn't. "You can come inside," she said quietly. "It's too cold to sit outside." He hesitated, clearly aware of the impropriety, but finally nodded. "All right. But I'll sit by the door, and we'll leave it open a crack. Don't want to give the gossips more ammunition than they already have." Inside her small house, he settled into the chair by the door while she made tea with shaking hands. When she brought 2 cups over, he accepted his with a nod of thanks. They sat in silence for a long moment, and Helena found herself studying him properly for the first time. He was a handsome man, she could admit that now, but it was more than just his looks. There was a solidity to him, a quiet strength that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt since Henry died. And there was something in his eyes, a shadow that spoke of his own pain and losses. "You said you knew what it was like to be alone," she said, surprising herself. "What did you mean?" He looked down at his cup, considering. "I was engaged once, 3 years ago, back in Montana. Her name was Sarah. We were going to be married in June." He paused, his jaw working. "She got sick in April, fever. She was gone in less than a week." "I'm so sorry," Helena whispered. "I came down here to start over. Thought maybe a new place would make it hurt less." He looked up at her, and the raw honesty in his face made her heart clench. "It didn't, not really, but time helped, and keeping busy. And eventually, I found I could breathe again without feeling like I was betraying her memory. You still think about her, every day, but it's different now. It doesn't hurt the same way. It's more like a sweet sadness than a sharp pain." He set his cup down carefully. "I'm not telling you this to compare our losses or to say I understand exactly what you're feeling. Everyone's grief is their own. But I wanted you to know that you're not alone in this, and that it does get easier, even when it feels like it never will." Helena felt tears sliding down her cheeks and didn't bother to wipe them away. "Everyone says I'm too broken to ever love again, that I should just accept that my heart is permanently damaged. That's nonsense," Ashton said firmly. "You're not broken. You're grieving, which is completely different. Your heart is wounded, yes, but wounds heal. And anyone who tells you otherwise doesn't understand the first thing about courage or strength. You don't think there's something wrong with me for having days when I can't even remember what Henry looked like, for sometimes going hours without thinking about him. I think that's called healing." His voice was gentle. "And I think Henry would want that for you. Would he have wanted you to lock yourself away forever, never knowing joy again?" Helena thought about her husband, about his quick laugh and generous spirit. "No, he would have hated that." "Then maybe it's time to stop listening to the Margaret Fosters of the world and start listening to your own heart." They talked until the sun set, sharing stories of their lost loves and their struggles with grief. Ashton told her about Sarah's love of music and how he still couldn't hear a fiddle without thinking of her. Helena told him about Henry's terrible jokes and his habit of bringing her wildflowers for no reason. And somehow, in the sharing, both of their burdens felt a little lighter. When Ashton finally left, well after dark despite the impropriety, Helena stood at her window and watched him walk away through the snow. Something had shifted between them today, something significant. And for the first time since Henry's death, she didn't feel guilty about it. December brought more snow and cold winds that howled through Goldfield streets. Helena continued her sewing and mending, but now Ashton stopped by regularly, always with some excuse, a question about mending, a delivery from the ranch, a repair that needed doing. They fell into an easy friendship, talking over coffee at her kitchen table while the winter wind rattled the windows. She learned that he loved horses but was afraid of heights, that he played harmonica badly but enthusiastically, that he'd wanted to be a teacher when he was young but circumstances had pushed him into ranch work instead. He learned that she'd always dreamed of having a dress shop, that she missed the ocean even though she'd only seen it once as a child, that she was terrified of thunderstorms after losing Henry. The town noticed, of course. The gossip increased, with opinions divided between those who thought Helena was moving on too quickly and those who thought Ashton was taking advantage of a vulnerable widow. Margaret Foster led the latter camp with evangelical fervor. "It's disgraceful," she announced loudly at the church Christmas social. "That cowboy is clearly preying on poor Helena's broken state. She's too damaged to see it, of course. Someone should intervene." Helena, who'd been standing just behind her, stepped forward. "Mrs. Foster, I would appreciate it if you would stop discussing my personal affairs as if I weren't capable of managing them myself." Margaret turned, her face flushing. "I'm simply concerned for your welfare." "No, you're enjoying the sound of your own voice and the attention that comes from spreading gossip." Helena's voice was calm but firm, and a hush fell over the room. "I am not broken. I am not damaged. I am a widow who has suffered a terrible loss, but that doesn't mean I've lost my mind or my ability to make my own choices. And if I choose to befriend Mr. O'Reilly or anyone else, that is my business and mine alone." She walked out of the church hall with her head high, aware of every eye on her. Outside, she found Ashton leaning against the building, clearly having skipped the social altogether. "Heard raised voices," he said. "Figured I'd wait out here in case you needed an escape route." "How did you know I'd be the one doing the yelling? Lucky guess." He straightened, his eyes searching her face. "You all right? Actually, I am." And she was. For the first time in a long time, she felt like herself again, like the woman she'd been before tragedy struck. Strong, capable, unbroken. "Walk me home, be my pleasure." They walked through the quiet streets, snow crunching under their boots. Helena was intensely aware of Ashton beside her, of the space between them that felt both too wide and too narrow at once. When they reached her porch, she turned to face him. "Ashton," she said, using his first name for the first time. "What are we doing?" He understood the question beneath the question. "I don't know," he admitted. "I told myself I was just being friendly, just helping a neighbor, but I think we both know it's become more than that." "I'm scared," Helena confessed. "I'm scared of forgetting Henry, scared of betraying his memory, scared of letting someone in just to lose them again." "I'm scared too," Ashton said softly. "Scared of not being enough, scared of moving too fast or not fast enough. Scared that I'm being selfish by wanting more when I know you're still healing." "What do we do?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle but firm. "We take it slow. We're honest with each other. And we don't let the Margaret Fosters of the world dictate how we feel or what we do." Helena looked down at their joined hands, at the way her small fingers fit between his larger ones. It felt right and terrifying in equal measure. "I don't know if I can love like that again, like I loved Henry. Completely, without holding anything back. I'm not asking you to." Ashton squeezed her hand gently. "Whatever you can give whenever you're ready to give it, that's enough. There's no timeline on this, Helena, no expectations. Just two people who enjoy each other's company and want to see where it goes." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and saw her own cautious hope reflected in his eyes. "All right," she whispered. "We'll see where it goes." He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his whole face, and lifted her hand to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was feather light, barely there, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "Merry Christmas, Helena," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Ashton." Christmas came and went. Helena spent the day quietly, visiting Henry's grave in the morning as she had the year before, but this year felt different. She told him about Ashton, about the friendship that was slowly becoming something more. She told him she was scared but hopeful. And somewhere in the telling, she felt a sense of peace settle over her, as if Henry himself was giving her permission to move forward. Ashton showed up that evening with a small, wrapped package. Inside was a silver thimble, beautifully engraved with tiny flowers. "For your sewing," he explained, looking suddenly nervous. "I noticed your old one was dented. The jeweler in Carson City made this. I hope it's all right." It was more than all right. It was thoughtful and practical and beautiful, exactly like the man who'd given it to her. Helena felt tears prick her eyes. "It's perfect," she said. "Thank you. I have something for you too, actually." She retrieved the package she'd hidden away, suddenly self-conscious. Inside was a warm scarf she'd knitted in dark blue wool, along with a new harmonica. "I know you said yours was old and losing notes," she explained as he unwrapped it. "And the scarf because you're always riding in the cold." Ashton stared at the gifts like they were made of gold. When he looked up, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Helena, this is the nicest thing anyone's given me in years." They spent Christmas evening by her fire, talking and laughing, and when Ashton left just before midnight, he kissed her cheek so gently she almost didn't feel it. Almost. The new year of 1884 arrived with hope and possibility. Ashton began courting Helena properly, though they kept it quiet to avoid fueling more gossip. He took her on rides through the desert on sunny afternoons, showing her the beauty of the Nevada landscape she'd lived in, but never really seen. They had picnics among the sage and Joshua trees, talking for hours about everything and nothing. He was patient with her in ways she hadn't known men could be. When she had bad days, when grief hit her unexpectedly and she withdrew, he didn't push. He simply waited, steady and sure, until she was ready to reach out again. And when she had good days, when she laughed freely and touched his arm without thinking, he treasured them without demanding more. Slowly, carefully, Helena felt her heart beginning to open again. It wasn't the same as it had been with Henry. This was different, deeper in some ways, built on shared understanding of loss and the preciousness of second chances. She found herself thinking about Ashton constantly, looking forward to his visits, missing him when he was gone. February brought a crisis that changed everything. A severe cold snap hit the region, and the cattle at the Double R began dying. Ashton worked around the clock trying to save them, barely sleeping, pushing himself to exhaustion. Helena hardly saw him for 2 weeks, and the absence felt like a physical ache. When he finally appeared at her door on a Sunday afternoon, he looked haggard and worn. She pulled him inside without a word and sat him down, bringing him food and coffee while he told her about the losses the ranch had sustained. "We lost nearly a quarter of the herd," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I keep thinking I should have done more, should have seen it coming." "You did everything humanly possible," Helena said firmly, kneeling beside his chair. "You can't control the weather, Ashton, I know, but it doesn't make it easier." He looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I missed you." "In the middle of all that chaos and death, all I could think about was how much I wanted to see you, to hear your voice. That probably sounds foolish." "No," Helena whispered. "It doesn't sound foolish at all." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. He went very still, his eyes searching hers. "Helena," he breathed. She didn't let herself think, didn't let herself doubt. She leaned forward and kissed him. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Ashton's arms came around her, pulling her close as he kissed her back with a tenderness that made her eyes sting. It was nothing like kissing Henry. This was its own thing, unique and precious, and it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Helena felt tears on her cheeks. "I'm not broken," she said fiercely. "I'm not too damaged to love again. I'm not any of the things they said." "No," Ashton agreed, wiping her tears with his thumb. "You're brave and strong and beautiful, and I'm falling in love with you, if that's all right. It's more than all right." Helena smiled through her tears. "Because I'm falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me, but it also feels like exactly what's supposed to happen." He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, and Helena felt something inside her that had been frozen since Henry's death finally began to thaw. She wasn't replacing Henry. She was making room for something new alongside the memory of what she'd had. Both could exist. Both could be real and true and worthy. They talked late into the night about their fears and hopes for the future. Ashton wanted to make sure she was truly ready, that she wasn't rushing into something to prove a point to the gossips. Helena assured him that while she might still have moments of grief and doubt, this was what she wanted. He was who she wanted. "I want to court you properly," Ashton said. "No more hiding. Let everyone in town know my intentions are honorable and serious." "They'll talk," Helena warned. "Let them. I don't care what anyone says as long as I know the truth." The next Sunday, Ashton attended church and sat beside Helena in her pew. The whispers ran through the congregation like wildfire, but when Margaret Foster opened her mouth to comment afterward, her husband, surprisingly, shushed her. "Let them be, Margaret. That cowboy has more honor in his little finger than most men have in their whole body. If he wants to court the widow, good for him." It was a small thing, but it mattered. Other voices began to join in support. Ruth from the ranch, the store owner who'd known Helena since she arrived in Goldfield. Old Mr. Peterson, who'd watched her struggle and survive with grace. Slowly, the tide of public opinion began to turn. March brought warmer weather and wildflowers blooming across the desert. Ashton took Helena riding to see them, acres of purple and yellow spreading across the landscape like a painted dream. They dismounted at a small spring and sat in the grass, surrounded by beauty. "I want to marry you," Ashton said suddenly. "Not today, not tomorrow, whenever you're ready, but I want you to know that's where I see this going. I love you, Helena. I want to build a life with you." Helena's heart raced, but this time it wasn't from fear. "I want that too, but I need a little more time. Not because I have doubts, but because I want to be completely sure I'm doing this for the right reasons. I need to know I'm not running from grief, but running toward joy." "Take all the time you need," Ashton said, pulling her close. "I'm not going anywhere." They spent the afternoon among the wildflowers, talking about dreams and plans. Ashton wanted to buy his own ranch someday. Helena still wanted her dress shop. Maybe, they thought, both dreams could coexist. Maybe they could build something together that honored both their pasts and their shared future. April arrived, bringing with it the anniversary of Henry's death. Helena woke that morning with a heavy heart, but when she went to the graveyard, Ashton was already there, sitting quietly near Henry's marker. "Thought you might want company," he said when she approached. "But I can go if you'd rather be alone." "Stay," Helena said, settling beside him on the grass. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Helena began to talk, telling Ashton more stories about Henry, about their brief marriage and the happiness they'd shared. Ashton listened without jealousy or impatience, understanding that honoring the past was part of moving toward the future. "He was a good man," Ashton said when she finished. "I wish I could have known him." "He would have liked you," Helena said. "He valued honesty and hard work and kindness. You would have been friends." It was true, and realizing it brought a sense of peace. She wasn't betraying Henry by loving Ashton. She was continuing the pattern of choosing good men, of building a life filled with love. Henry would have wanted that for her. "I'm ready," she said softly. Ashton looked at her. "Ready for what?" "To say yes. To marry you, to build that life we talked about." She took his hand. "I'll always love Henry. Part of my heart will always belong to him, but I have room for you too, more than room, and I'm ready to move forward." Ashton's face lit up like the sunrise. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He kissed her there in the graveyard with Henry's marker nearby, and it felt like a blessing rather than a betrayal. They spent the rest of the day making plans. A simple wedding in June, combining their households. Ashton had saved enough to put a down payment on a small ranch property that had come up for sale. With Helena's sewing income and his work, they could make it work. That evening, Ashton went to speak with the church pastor and make arrangements. Helena went home to begin sorting through her belongings, deciding what to keep and what to let go. She found herself humming, something she hadn't done in over a year, and the sound filled her small house with life. May was a blur of preparation. Helena sewed her own wedding dress, simple but beautiful in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar. Ashton worked extra hours to save more money for their future ranch. They spent their evenings together planning and dreaming, and Helena felt herself becoming lighter, freer, more like her old self, but also someone new. Someone who'd survived tragedy and found joy on the other side. Margaret Foster made one last attempt at interference, stopping Helena on the street in late May. "You're making a mistake," she said bluntly. "You're too broken to be a proper wife. You'll only end up hurting that poor man when he realizes you can't give him what he needs." Helena looked at the older woman with something approaching pity. "Mrs. Foster, I'm sorry you've never loved deeply enough to understand this, but grief doesn't break you. It changes you. And yes, I'll carry Henry's memory with me always. But that doesn't diminish what I feel for Ashton. If anything, it makes it deeper, because I know how precious and fragile love is. I won't waste a moment of it." She walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Margaret speechless on the street. The wedding took place on a perfect June day, exactly 2 years and 2 months after Henry's death. Helena wore her cream dress and carried wildflowers from the desert. Ashton wore his best suit and looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The church was half full with townspeople, some genuinely happy for them, others there for the spectacle. Pastor Williams kept the ceremony simple and heartfelt. When it came time for the vows, Ashton took Helena's hands in his. "Helena, I promise to love you with all that I am and all that I have. I promise to honor your past even as we build our future. I promise to be patient when you need time and present when you need comfort. I promise to laugh with you, cry with you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. You've taught me that love isn't something that breaks us. It's what makes us whole." Helena's voice was steady when she spoke her vows. "Ashton, I promise to love you freely and fully without reservation or fear. I promise to be honest with you always, even when it's hard. I promise to build a life with you that honors both who we were and who we're becoming. You've shown me that having the courage to love again isn't betrayal. It's the greatest form of hope, and I choose hope. I choose you, today and always." There wasn't a dry eye in the church when they kissed, sealing their promises with tenderness and joy. The reception was held at the ranch house where Helena had sheltered during that first storm. Ruth had outdone herself with food and decorations, and even the most skeptical townspeople had to admit it was a beautiful celebration. Helena danced with Ashton under the desert stars, feeling freer and happier than she'd imagined possible. When Margaret Foster and her husband arrived late, bearing a gift with tight-lipped courtesy, Helena surprised everyone by crossing the yard to greet them warmly. "Thank you for coming," she said sincerely. "It means a great deal to have the community's support." Margaret looked taken aback but managed a stiff smile. "You look happy," she admitted grudgingly. "I am," Helena said simply. "I really am." Watching from across the yard, Ashton's heart swelled with love and pride for his wife. The word felt perfect. They spent their wedding night at the ranch in the guest quarters Ruth had prepared for them, and everything was tender and careful and right. Ashton took his time, making sure Helena felt safe and cherished. When she cried, he held her until the tears passed, understanding they were tears of healing rather than sorrow. And when she laughed, the sound was like music filling all the empty spaces. "I love you," she whispered in the darkness. "I love you so much it scares me." "Don't be scared," Ashton murmured, pulling her close. "We're in this together now. Whatever comes, we face it side by side." Summer passed in a haze of happiness as they settled into married life. The small ranch property Ashton had bought was perfect, 15 acres with a modest house that needed work, but had good bones. They spent evenings planning improvements and working together to make it home. Helena set up a sewing room in the spare bedroom, taking on clients and slowly building a reputation that extended beyond Goldfield. In August, Ruth offered Helena the chance to sell her handmade items at the ranch's quarterly auction. The response was overwhelming. Her dresses, quilts, and embroidered linens brought impressive prices, and suddenly, Helena's dream of a real business seemed possible. "You could open that dress shop," Ashton said one evening as they reviewed her earnings. "Maybe not a full store yet, but you could rent space in town. Make custom pieces, build up a clientele." "We need the money for the ranch," Helena protested, but her eyes shone with longing. "The ranch will be fine. This is your dream, Helena. Let's make it happen." By October, Helena had rented a small storefront on Goldfield's Main Street. She called it Sawyer's Stitches, honoring both her married names in a way that felt right. Ashton built her shelves and a cutting table, and Ruth spread the word among the ranch wives and daughters. Within weeks, Helena had more orders than she could handle. She hired an assistant, a young woman named Clara who'd recently arrived in town and needed work. Clara was quick-fingered and eager to learn, and having company during the long sewing hours made the work feel less solitary. The shop became a gathering place for women in town, somewhere they could talk freely while being fitted for new dresses or picking up mending. Even Margaret Foster eventually came in, needing a new dress for her daughter's wedding. She was grudging at first, but Helena's skill and professionalism won her over. By the time the dress was finished, Margaret had softened considerably. "You've done well for yourself," she admitted at the final fitting. "I may have been wrong about you, may have been." Helena raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at her lips. Margaret actually laughed. "All right, I was wrong. You weren't too broken. You were just healing in your own time. And that cowboy of yours is a good man." "He is," Helena agreed. "The very best." Winter came again, but this year Helena didn't dread it. The house she shared with Ashton was warm and full of laughter. They spent long evenings by the fire, Ashton playing his harmonica while Helena sewed. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. Both felt like home. In January of 1885, Helena realized she was pregnant. The discovery brought a complicated mix of emotions: joy, terror, grief for the child she'd never had with Henry, and overwhelming love for the baby growing inside her. Ashton was thrilled and terrified in equal measure, immediately becoming overprotective and hovering. "I'm not fragile," Helena reminded him gently when he insisted she rest more. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," Ashton replied stubbornly. "Not my wife." His protectiveness was endearing, if occasionally excessive. As her belly grew through the spring, Helena felt herself blooming with it. She'd worried that pregnancy would make her think constantly of Henry, of the children they'd planned to have. And while those thoughts did come, they no longer brought only pain. They brought bittersweet remembrance alongside joy for what she now had. Ruth became her constant companion and advisor, having raised 4 children herself. She helped Helena prepare the nursery in the ranch house and shared endless stories and wisdom about motherhood. Clara proved equally helpful, taking on more work at the shop so Helena could rest when needed. In late June, after a long labor that had Ashton pacing holes in the floor, Helena gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Henry, after the husband she'd lost, with Ashton's blessing and encouragement. "He was part of your story," Ashton said, holding his newborn son with tears in his eyes. "Part of what made you who you are. It's right to honor that." Little Henry was perfect, with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. Helena looked at him and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. This wasn't replacement or forgetting. This was continuation, life going on, love multiplying rather than dividing. The christening was held in August, with half of Goldfield in attendance. Margaret Foster brought a beautiful hand-knitted blanket, and her gift of it was gracious and genuine. The town that had once whispered about the broken widow now celebrated her happiness. Life settled into a new rhythm. Helena managed to keep the shop running with Clara's help, though she spent less time there and more at home with little Henry. Ashton continued working as foreman while building up their own ranch on the side. It was hard work, but it was good work, and they were building something meaningful together. In the spring of 1886, a circuit judge came through Goldfield on business. Over dinner at the ranch, he told them about new opportunities opening up in California with the railroad expansion. Businesses were booming. Towns were growing. There was need for skilled seamstresses and experienced ranch foremen alike. "You ever think about moving on?" he asked. "Not that Goldfield isn't nice, but a young couple with your skills could do very well in a bigger town." Helena and Ashton exchanged glances. They'd both been thinking the same thing lately. They loved Goldfield, but it would always carry memories of tragedy alongside the happiness. And with their businesses growing, perhaps a fresh start in a place with more opportunities made sense. "What do you think?" Ashton asked later that night after the judge had gone and Henry was asleep in his cradle. "I think maybe it's time," Helena said slowly. "I'll always be grateful to Goldfield. It's where I survived, where I met you, where we built this life, but maybe we've outgrown it." They spent the next few months preparing. The ranch sold quickly to a young family just starting out. Helena found a buyer for her shop in Clara, who'd proven herself more than capable of running it. Ruth cried when they told her but understood. "You need to spread your wings," she said, hugging Helena tight. "But you better write me regularly, you hear?" In the fall of 1886, Helena, Ashton, and little Henry loaded their belongings into a wagon and left Goldfield for good. Helena looked back once at the small town that had witnessed her greatest tragedy and greatest joy. Then she turned forward, toward Ashton and their son and whatever future awaited them. They settled in Sacramento, California, where the railroad boom was bringing prosperity and growth. Ashton found work quickly at a large ranch outside the city, and his skill with horses earned him rapid promotions. Helena opened a proper dress shop in Sacramento's growing downtown, and her reputation for quality and style attracted wealthy clients. Life was good, better than good. But it wasn't without its challenges. In the spring of 1887, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, and complications in the last month had the doctor worried. Ashton nearly drove himself mad with anxiety, remembering how he'd lost Sarah, terrified of losing Helena. "I'm not going anywhere," Helena told him firmly, even as she felt her own fears. "We're fighters, this baby and me. We'll get through this." In July, after a difficult labor, Helena gave birth to twin girls. They were small but healthy, with powerful lungs that announced their arrival to the entire neighborhood. Ashton wept with relief and joy, holding his daughters like they were made of spun glass. They named the twins Rose and Grace, and they were as different as night and day from the start. Rose was bold and loud, demanding attention. Grace was quieter, more observant, content to watch the world from the safety of her father's arms. Little Henry, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sisters and appointed himself their fierce protector. The years that followed were full and rich. Ashton became a partner in the ranch, his expertise valued and respected. Helena's shop thrived, eventually employing 6 seamstresses and serving the wealthiest families in Sacramento. They bought a beautiful house with a garden where the children played, and life was everything Helena had once thought she'd never have again. But she never forgot where she'd come from. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep, and she sat with Ashton on their porch, she'd think about Henry and the life they'd briefly shared. The pain of his loss had faded to a soft ache, present but no longer overwhelming. She could think of him with love and gratitude rather than sharp grief. "Do you ever regret it?" Ashton asked her one such evening in the summer of 1891. They were older now, approaching 40, with gray starting to show in their hair. "Marrying me, I mean, starting over." Helena looked at him in genuine surprise. "Never, not for a single moment. Why would you ask that?" "Sometimes I wonder if I pushed too hard, if you needed more time." "Ashton O'Reilly, you did no such thing." She took his hand, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "You gave me exactly what I needed when I needed it. You showed me that being broken and being healed aren't permanent states. We move between them, and that's all right. You taught me that love isn't finite, that opening your heart again doesn't diminish what came before." "You taught me that too," Ashton said softly. I was so scared after Sarah died. Scared to feel anything, scared to want anything. You made me brave again." They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies dance in the garden. Inside, their 3 children slept safely. The shop downtown bore Helena's name and reputation. The ranch thrived under Ashton's steady guidance. They'd built this life from grief and hope, and it was beautiful. In 1892, a letter arrived from Goldfield. Ruth was getting older and wanted to see them one more time. So that summer, the family made the journey back to Nevada, the children excited for adventure and their parents nostalgic for the place that had shaped them. Goldfield had changed. It was smaller now. Some of the silver played out. Families moved on to new strikes and opportunities. But the bones remained, and so did some familiar faces. Ruth wept when she saw them, exclaiming over how big the children had grown. Margaret Foster was there too, now elderly and softened by time, actually smiling when she saw Helena. They visited Henry Sawyer's grave together, Helena and Ashton and the 3 children who bore his legacy in different ways. Henry the boy had his name. The girls had his kindness and joy. All of them were proof that love persisted, that tragedy didn't have the final word. "Thank you," Helena whispered to the stone marker. "Thank you for the time we had. Thank you for teaching me how to love. I hope you're proud of the life I've built." A breeze stirred the desert sage, warm and gentle, and Helena chose to believe it was answer enough. They spent a week in Goldfield, reconnecting with old friends and introducing their children to the place where their parents' story began. Ashton showed Henry the ranch where he'd worked, teaching him about horses and responsibility. Helena took the girls to see her old shop, now thriving under Clara's capable management. On their last evening, they had dinner at Ruth's ranch house, the place where they'd sheltered from that first storm so many years ago. Ruth raised a glass of wine. "To Helena," she said, "who proved everyone wrong by refusing to stay broken, who showed us all that healing isn't forgetting and moving forward isn't betrayal. You're an inspiration, dear girl." "To Ashton," Helena countered, "who saw strength where others saw weakness, who had the patience to wait and the courage to love." "To second chances," Ashton added, "and the people brave enough to take them." They clinked glasses, surrounded by love and friendship and the echoes of all they'd overcome. The children played in the yard as the sun set over the Nevada desert, and everything felt exactly as it should be. The journey back to Sacramento was long but full of laughter. The children chattered about their adventures, already planning to visit Aunt Ruth again next summer. Helena and Ashton exchanged glances over their heads, communicating without words the way long married couples do. They were thinking the same thing: how far they'd come, how much they'd survived, how grateful they were for every moment. Life continued its forward march. Henry grew into a fine young man, skilled with horses like his father and kind like his namesake. Rose became a force of nature, determined and bold, eventually taking over her mother's dress shop with innovative ideas that pushed the business to new heights. Grace married a teacher and filled her home with books and music and laughter. And through it all, Helena and Ashton remained the center, the foundation on which their family stood. They grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1904, Ashton took Helena back to the desert, to the place where wildflowers had bloomed all those years ago. "I would do it all again," he told her, his green eyes still as bright as they'd been when he was 27. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it just to end up here with you." "Even the hard parts?" Helena asked, though she already knew the answer. "Especially the hard parts. They made us who we are." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, comfortable and safe. "You were never too broken to love, Helena. You were exactly broken enough to understand how precious it is." She smiled, thinking about the young widow she'd been, terrified and grieving and convinced her life was over. If she could go back and tell that woman what waited ahead, would she believe it? Probably not. Some things had to be lived to be understood. "I love you," she said simply. "Then, now, always." "Always," Ashton agreed and kissed her as the desert sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. They lived another 15 years together, long enough to see grandchildren born and their business legacies secured. Long enough to sit on their porch and watch life unfold with the wisdom that only comes from surviving loss and choosing joy anyway. Long enough to prove, beyond any doubt, that love was never about being unbroken. It was about being brave enough to try again. When Ashton passed quietly in his sleep in 1919 at the age of 62, Helena grieved deeply but not desperately. She'd had 45 years with him, 45 years of love and partnership and shared life. It was more than many people ever got, and she was grateful for every single day. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, spending her days in the garden Ashton had built for her. And when her time came in 1924, at the age of 65, she went peacefully, with Rose holding one hand and Grace holding the other, and Henry standing steady at the foot of the bed. They buried her beside Ashton in Sacramento, but in her will, she'd left instructions for a small marker to be placed in Goldfield as well near Henry's grave. It reads simply, "Helena Sawyer O'Reilly. She was never too broken to love. 1859–1924. The town of Goldfield, much diminished from its boom days but still standing, honored her request. And sometimes, when the desert wind blows just right and the wildflowers bloom across the Nevada landscape, locals swear they can hear laughter carried on the breeze, joyful and free, the sound of a woman who refused to let tragedy define her, who chose courage over fear, who proved that the human heart is far more resilient than anyone gives it credit for." Her story became legend in those parts, told to young widows and grieving souls who thought their lives were over. They'd hear about Helena, who lost her first husband to senseless violence, who was told she was too damaged to ever recover, and who instead found a love deeper and richer than she'd imagined possible, who built a business and raised a family and lived a full, joyous life, who showed them all that broken isn't permanent, that healing is possible, and that the courage to try again is the greatest strength any of us possess. And in the telling, others found hope, found the strength to take one more step, to open their hearts one more time, to believe that their stories weren't over either. That's the real legacy Helena left behind, more valuable than any business or property. She left proof that love persists, that joy returns, that we are all stronger than we know. The dress shop in Sacramento still stands, now run by Rose's granddaughter, still bearing the Sawyer name. The ranch Ashton helped build still operates, managed by Henry's descendants. And in Goldfield, Nevada, 2 markers stand in the desert cemetery, silent testament to a love story that began in tragedy and ended in triumph. Proof that the human heart, no matter how broken, has an infinite capacity to heal and love and hope again. That's the truth Margaret Foster never understood, the truth that Helena and Ashton learned together in the crucible of grief and grace. We're not defined by what breaks us. We're defined by what we choose to do afterward, by the courage we find to keep going, to keep loving, to keep believing that tomorrow might be better than today. And sometimes, if we're very lucky and very brave, tomorrow brings us exactly what we need, exactly when we need it, in the form of a quiet cowboy with green eyes and a patient heart, who sees us not as broken but as beautifully, perfectly human. Helena's story didn't end when Henry died. It didn't even end when she died. It continues in every person who hears it and decides to take one more chance, to open their heart one more time, to believe that maybe, just maybe, they're not too broken to love again either. Because we never are. We're just waiting for someone brave enough to prove it, the way Ashton proved it to Helena all those years ago in the wild, beautiful, unforgiving desert of Nevada, where love bloomed like wildflowers after rain, unexpected and perfect and absolutely worth every risk.